Welcome to the Lending Brief podcast, brought to you by the Gov Navigators and sponsored by Alicorp. Alicorp brings the precision and expertise of commercial banking technology to the public sector. From preventing fraud in small business loans to reimagining how Treasury processes payments, our guests share firsthand stories of innovation, challenge, and impact. Whether you're in government, financial services, or technology, this series reveals how modern lending platforms can better serve the public and protect taxpayer dollars. Welcome to the Lending Brief. So, Adam, we get a chance to talk to the legend, Dave Lebryk, former fiscal assistant secretary, former acting secretary of Treasury, who had many different roles throughout his career, but suffice it to say, few icons on this program. Today's is a genuine one.
Absolutely.
Welcome,
true.
Dave Lebryk.
You're very kind. I'm very pleased to join you.
I didn't mean to set the bar too high.
Yeah, Dave, don't screw it up now.
So let's just dive in. You've had a front row seat to Treasury's evolution in numerous areas of financial management. Can you reflect on, through your various roles, what you saw as the biggest transformation, the biggest, most positive transformation in your tenure?
Yeah, I think that it's hard to nail it down to one. I would say a couple things that the CFO community tends to be vastly underrated. And one of the areas where I think we just made tremendous progress was on the Data Act, in which was the CFOs really focusing more on the data. And the community really came together to sort of do something different and new and sort of without any funding. I think it was kind of remarkable about the Data Act. There was no funding attached to it. And the community, I think we did a really great job of developing data standards. We used an agile development methodology, which had never been done in a government-wide project before. And our results, we were able to kind of put together a broker in less than 9 months to collect data from the various agencies. And we had done something similar previously, which, and Robert, you'll appreciate this given your OMB days, where we had tried to collect data from the agencies. And when we went live in this very large project, the day we went live, it was a disaster. We had gone about it the old way, in which we had built the functional requirements and we said we were talking to the end users, but we hadn't actually been talking to the end users. So when we went live over the holidays, it was a very poor implementation. And I remember getting a phone call from the deputy director of OMB and really, getting an earful about how poorly this execution had gone. By contrast, fast forward, when we use the agile methodology for the Data Act, the deputy director of OMB called me up and told me how wonderful the implementation had been, how smooth it had gone, and really what an ideal project it was. And it was very reassuring later on in my career when I was at the CFO Council. We had another project going on. And I said, how come we can't run this project like the Data Act? Now, it didn't exactly feel that way when we were, during the implementation of the Data Act, given sort of many of the challenges that we had.
Right.
But I think that foundational work of really, getting our arms around data, improving the quality of data was really something that I think even today continues to be really important.
So the fraud prevention and fraud detection has always been a wild card. And I'm sure you saw evolutions multiple times in your time at Treasury. How do you think that data and new technology has helped change the way that Treasury and other agencies in the federal government approach fraud prevention?
So as many nice things I have to say about the Data Act, one of the things that the mantra that we had at the time, and I'll take maybe a little bit of credit for this, which was, better data, better decisions, better government. And I think in my time, I'm not so sure that we've always been able to achieve that objective as fully as we can.
I wish people still said that now. That's a fantastic mantra. Every agency should say that in every function.
Yes, but I will tell you the one area where it does have the ability to sort of reach that, it is in fraud prevention. And I really do think that the more that we can do to aggregate data from the agencies and share data with states and localities, like, for example, who are also federally funded state-administered programs, that ability to aggregate data and use it to prevent fraud, the potential is enormous. It's one of the things that we struggled with sometimes within government was, how could we don't monetize our data in the same way that gets done in the private sector, except as it relates to fraud, where you really truly can monetize the data to have an end result, an ROI. And so I think that, that agile methodology that I talked about also is very relevant as it relates to the ability for agencies to work with one another and to share data and have better uses of that data. But I think, it's an area that there's just so much potential. And I think we're just scratching the surface. I know, my last 18 months in government, I really focused hard on this question about what could we do centrally at fiscal to do a better job. And we really moved the needle. We had gone from $650 million fraud prevention to $7.2 billion in 1 year. And we identified another additional 19 data sets that if we had access to them, we could have identified another 30 billion of fraud prevention. So I think, there's just really great opportunity there. And I think coming out of the pandemic, where you saw us move so quickly and move money out the door, I know it was very difficult in many times to be in those conversations and know that we were moving money out the door quickly and that we were going to be a target of fraud, where you couldn't really say, we can do both. We can get money out the door quickly and we can stop fraud. I believe today we can do that we don't have to have an either or if we continue to make progress on the fraud prevention tools.
Yeah, that's a great point. But, those tools have evolved during your career, and you've seen major crises and turn the world upside down. Can you reflect on what those periods taught you about government's ability to deliver in those times?
I think that the government is vastly underappreciated, and one of the things it does extremely well is to respond to crisis. And I think if you go back and look historically, whether it be anything from Operation Warp Speed to getting the pandemic vaccine in play, whether it had to do with like what in my world where I had a very sort of one of the most memorable moments in my career was the pandemic hits. And Secretary Mnuchin walks into the secretary's conference room and looks down at the end of the table and says, you're in charge of getting these economic impact payments out in 10 days. And, we had never done anything close to that. And so it was one of the things that, things you learn, and this was really true in the Data Act as well, is you really do need to partner with a lot of different people, particularly when you have a very strong civil servant and a political appointee you can get a lot of things done. The political appointee tends to understand the politics of things and give authority. And the career person oftentimes is very good at navigating the bureaucracy to actually move it. Well, we got out 80 million payments within 10 days of the president signing that bill. And then we got 163 million payments out within 4 weeks. And why that's really kind of extraordinary is the last time we had done anything similar, we weren't able to get the first payment out for 5 weeks, let alone complete the program within 4. And I think that's an example of the government has the capability of being really good in the moment when it needs to be. It struggles at times when we don't have those action forcing events to really compel us to do things. And so, I've often said is, after you would have thought that after getting all those economic impact payments and really kind of turning the economic tide, not just domestically, but internationally, that there would have been higher trust in government. And it really didn't work out that way. And, unfortunately, but I think you can look at a number of examples. We had the Key Bridge issue in Baltimore. We had the I-95 issue in recently where, the government really does have enormous capacity to move quickly and effectively in moments of crisis.
And Dave, do you think it really focuses the effort of a host of different people in those crises? Do you think that's part of the reason why, or is it because you have that sort of top to bottom, the politicals are in alignment with the career staff and everyone is marching in the same direction, or is it both?
Well, I think that, I talk about the issue. We have silos within government, and I would argue that we have silos of excellence. And so, in my world, we had silos of excellence in making payments. We have silos of excellence in raising funding for the government in our auctions. What that does is it makes most of the people in those areas have a head down, and really what they end up doing is thinking, no matter what, we need to get this done. It doesn't make them think horizontally across in networks. When a crisis occurs, that ends. You really are at that moment, you have to start to think about, hey, we no longer can look head down into our silo. We need to look across different entities. And in these situations, you see it's usually a very strong collaboration between the state and local and the federal government and private sector. and oftentimes nonprofits and philanthropies will enter into that, and community groups. And in those moments, you see this enormous power and leverage that occurs that only one single entity can't necessarily solve a problem. But when you work collaboratively in that moment to a common shared vision and mission, you see really extraordinary things happen, and you see it happen quickly.
So where should we focus those efforts going forward? Where do you see the big opportunities in disbursements, in identity verification, fraud prevention, what have you?
Yeah, I think that the highest on my list would be fraud prevention. I think that, where I would say in that instance is, again, the state administered federally funded programs, where when you look at what the government does in many cases is we really do act as a transfer function. So much of the delivery of services occurs at the state and local level and doesn't really necessarily occur at the federal level. There's exceptions like tax collection and passports and a variety of other things that end up being delivered by the federal government. But I think that in those cases, there's this really great opportunity for us to make strides. For example, there really should never be a situation where someone has the ability to apply for Medicare or for Medicaid or for unemployment in 4 or 5 different states. Or if you move from one state to another, the databases should allow you to understand that someone is no longer in that state, they've moved to another. And so that kind of collaboration and that kind of data aggregation would be really enormously powerful in stopping much of the fraud that we see. But we also see, for example, in other places where, when you go to eligibility, there needs to be better screening that takes place. And it's really not, this is one of those examples where the private sector has the capability of delivering a lot of really important tools to us that we probably can't develop or maintain internally. So if we look at a fraud prevention model on, for example, looking at billions of payments, the private sector has gotten very good at looking at billions of credit card transactions and looking for anomalies. We should be able to do the exact same thing in the payments area, where we're looking for anomalies that are occurring in those 70, 80 million payments that we're making every month. And you can do that both as it relates to the front end with respect to eligibility, but also in the back end as you're continuing to make those ongoing payments.
So Dave, you mentioned the private sector. Tell us some pieces of advice you would have for those technology companies and other innovators in the private sector who have something that they think can be useful and helpful in their efforts to try to partner with Treasury or with other agencies in the payments area.
Yeah, so one of the areas which I think I was really, quite proud of that we developed was the QSMO, the Qualified Service Management Organization. And we have, that was one of those efforts that this is another example, I think, a very small number of people can make a disproportionate impact. And we put together a very small team and thought about, hey, how can we build a marketplace that allows the private sector and to marry the private sector and the public sector so they can actually use the services and get to those services quickly. And I would argue that, anyone who's this QSMO marketplace has been, I think, enormously effective and enormously good. And I think there's another example of we really were very focused on sort of partnerships. We were very focused on collaboration with the agencies. And I think that, there's still room to grow there, but I think it's really quite a positive development that we have. And I think as we've seen more and more private sector entities see that QSMO and see that marketplace, that gives them an opportunity to really kind of enter into the government work and get to the government work more quickly.
So do you see other opportunities for shared services? If we can, I recall during my career consolidating payroll systems, which we
Yes.
did successfully, but those have languished. They did not keep up with modern technology, frankly.
Yes.
Are there other areas where you think we could move to a shared service that can also continue to innovate?
Yes, I do. And I think that there's a couple that come by. I think you hit one that's has always been a really tough one. And there's also this next tough one, which is grants. Like grants is another one which is really ripe for more standardization. I think lending platform is really another area. And I would say that the thing, kind of coming back to this, you need to have a really seamless, frictionless process. And we don't have that in the grants world right now. And we don't have that in the lending world right now, where someone can come in and sort of end to end, sort of sit down and say, hey, I can either do intake it with data, as well as then do fraud prevention simultaneously, right? So this is my comment about how you can spend money or send money out, but you don't have to relax your fraud prevention tools. And so if you have a framework or a platform that can do those things about, the intake side with the end user, making it easy. I mean, someone made a comment to me the other day and they were saying, look, I was standing in line at Macy's and the person in front of me said that they wanted they wanted to get the new charge card. And the person goes, oh my gosh, I'm going to be in this line for days now that this person is trying to get the charge card. Well, it turned out it took about 15, 20, 30 seconds, a minute for that person to be approved to be approved. Well, you should ask yourself the question, why can't we do more of that kind of thing in the government, where when the person comes in and we are able to capture information easily and seamlessly to make that process go smoothly. And I think that, again, at the same time, doing checks, as you're going along to make sure that there's not fraud in the process. And then importantly, to go on the back end and saying, how do we make sure we manage this portfolio? How do we make sure that we administer the program effectively? And right now in government, that's being done with multiple systems that really don't talk to one another. Oftentimes that information is in someone's head. It's not been put on a piece of paper, or there's not really kind of a good understanding. So when Joe or Joan leaves, that goes with them, and it sort of ruins those processes. So this was always our theme about shared services, about why it was so important to have the standardized platform with standards, uniform standards that you could administer these things in a more seamless, efficient way.
Dave, this has been fantastic. Sorry, we have time for maybe one more question. I'm just wondering if you have any final thoughts or reflections, not just on your amazing career, but kind of where we're at right now in this space in the federal government.
Yeah, I think that, I was spending some time at the Kennedy School this fall and was talking to, students about, the future. And I would say that there is enormous opportunity at a variety of levels to continue to make a difference. And, that sometimes can be done at the state and local level. I think what's not well understood is that, there are many more contractors doing federal work than there are federal employees. And so there are opportunities to work with vendors who are doing government's work. I also think that, that we had this conversation about how quickly technology is changing. And I had my wife's an English teacher, and we were talking about how her students now are AI native, on sort of, chat GPT native. They know how to use AI. Well, you only fast forward 3, 4, 5 years back, those students are not AI native. Yep. And I think this is one of those issues where in the federal government, we're going to need to have a lot more people who come in who are going to be much more comfortable with technology and being able to actually use that to change and transform the way we deliver public services.
We've covered the landscape, Dave, in a very short period of time. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you for having me again. It's always fun.
We'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you.